The knock at the door felt too loud for the quiet of my apartment, and when I opened it, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Standing there, my stepfather George looked like a man who had already made up his mind about everything, his expression serious, controlled, almost predatory. His usual easygoing demeanor had vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he just stood there, looking past me into the apartment as if evaluating it, like he was already measuring its value. It sent an uncomfortable chill up my spine, but I wasn't about to let him see how unnerved I felt. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside I was already bracing for something. I had been living in this apartment for nearly a year after my mom passed, and the last thing I expected was a visit from him. We hadn't exactly been on great terms, but I thought we'd settled into an unspoken truce. He'd kept his distance, and I'd been managing everything my mother left behind, her assets, her properties, all the legal matters. I had assumed that was the end of it. But as he stepped into the doorway, his eyes locked onto mine, and I knew something was about to shatter that fragile peace. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and deliberate, like he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. I didn't know why, but everything about him in that instant felt wrong. He wasn't just here to chat or catch up. He had an agenda, and whatever it was, I wasn't going to like it. "About what?" I asked, folding my arms across my chest. My instincts were screaming at me to shut the door, but I didn't. There was something in his demeanor that kept me rooted to the spot. A sinking feeling, like I was standing on the edge of something that was about to collapse beneath me. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped past me into the apartment, taking a slow look around, as if making himself at home. He did this every time he visited, acting like he had some right to be here. But today, there was a tension in his movements that I hadn't seen before. The air between us thickened, heavy with the unspoken. "I know you've been managing things after your mom's passing," he started, and I could already hear the subtle shift in his voice. The way he was trying to soften it, like he was about to offer me help, but I wasn't buying it. "But there are some things we need to address. The properties, for one." The word properties hit me like a slap. My mom had left behind 2 apartments in prime locations in the city. She had always been smart with her investments, and those apartments were worth a fortune. I had never thought much about them, focusing more on dealing with the day-to-day of her affairs. But now, hearing him mention them, a knot formed in my stomach. The pieces of this conversation were starting to fall into place, but I couldn't figure out exactly what he was after. "Mom left them to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but the doubt in my own words betrayed me. George smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a man trying to be friendly. It was the smile of a man who had already won, the kind of smile you give when you know the other person has no idea what's coming. "Ah, yes," he said slowly, like he was savoring each word. "Your mom and I, we had some agreements, you see. When we married, we made certain arrangements. Financial matters, legal things. You probably don't know about them, but they're there. And now, it's time to address them." I frowned. "What kind of agreements? You've got to be kidding me." His smile faltered just slightly, but it quickly returned. "It's all very simple, really. You've been managing everything in your mom's name, but now it's time to transfer ownership of the apartments. To me." "Excuse me?" The words barely left my mouth before I realized just how badly my heart was pounding in my chest. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as if to emphasize the finality of what he was saying. "You see, your mother and I made sure that everything would be handled the right way. She knew it would be best for someone with experience to take care of the property. That's me. I'm the one who knows how to make sure they're profitable, to make sure everything runs smoothly." I could feel my hands trembling at my sides. My mind raced, my thoughts jumbled, each one crashing into the next like a tidal wave. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could my mother have done this? How could she have left me in the dark about something so important? The more I tried to process it, the more angry and betrayed I felt. "That's not what she told me," I said, my voice tight, my anger rising. "She never said anything about transferring the apartments to you. This doesn't make sense. Oh, it's very simple, George said with a dismissive wave of his hand. You'll see. Everything's already set up. I just need you to sign the paperwork, and then it's all settled. Don't worry. You won't have to worry about the hassle anymore. It'll be taken care of. You'll be free. The words hit me like a slap, but it wasn't the offer of freedom that scared me. It was the way he said it, like it was already decided, like I had no say in the matter. His smile deepened, and for the first time in this conversation, I saw the true arrogance in his eyes, the sense that he had already won. I'm not signing anything, I said, stepping back, my body tense with the urge to do anything, to push him away. But he wasn't finished. You don't have a choice, he said, and I swear there was a finality in his tone that made my blood run cold. You'll see. Once everything's signed, you'll understand. He turned to leave, his back to me as he walked toward the door, but before he stepped through it, he paused. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You wouldn't want to make your mother's final wishes a problem, would you? His voice dropped lower, like a threat now, and I felt it deep down, in the pit of my stomach. Goodbye, he said, his words hanging in the air like a lingering poison, and before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me standing in the doorway, utterly paralyzed by the weight of what had just happened. It wasn't just about property. This wasn't just about money. There was something far more dangerous at play here, and I had no idea how deep it went. The next few days felt like I was walking through fog, everything around me hazy and distant. I couldn't shake the conversation with George from my mind. His words played over and over in my head, each time a little more insistent, a little more sinister. You don't have a choice, he had said. It was those words that gnawed at me, sinking deep into my skin, making everything feel unreal, like I was just waiting for some kind of trap to spring. But I didn't know where to look for it, or what to do about it. I tried calling my lawyer, but they weren't available. The office said they'd get back to me as soon as possible, but when the hours passed and I still hadn't heard anything, I started to feel the weight of the situation press down on me. Every time I thought about what George had said, about the properties and how everything was set up, I felt a rising panic in my chest. My mother had always been so meticulous about everything, so careful with her legal and financial matters, so how could something like this happen without my knowledge? Had George been pulling strings behind my back this entire time? It didn't make sense. It wasn't until the third day after George's visit that I received a phone call from a man I didn't recognize. His name was Rick. He introduced himself as a lawyer and said he had some important documents for me to sign. The way he spoke was smooth, practiced, like someone who had done this 1,000 times, and I didn't trust him for a second. I asked how he got my number, and he casually brushed it off, saying he had been given it by George, who had instructed him to handle everything. My stomach twisted. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Everything had been carefully planned, and I was caught in the middle of it. I didn't say much more on the phone, but I told him I'd meet him. The whole situation felt wrong, but what else could I do? I needed to understand what was going on. I needed to see the paperwork for myself. I just didn't expect what happened when I got there. The meeting took place at a small, quiet law office in a part of the city I wasn't familiar with. It was tucked away on the second floor of an old building with faded walls and flickering lights. When I walked in, the smell of old paper and musty furniture hit me immediately. The office was dimly lit, and there was only one person there waiting for me, Rick. He stood up when I entered, a pleasant smile on his face, too pleasant, like he had been expecting me. "Please, take a seat," he said, motioning toward the chair across from his desk. I hesitated, but I didn't have much of a choice. I walked over and sat down, trying to keep my expression neutral, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. Rick placed a folder in front of me, opened it slowly, and slid it across the desk. His eyes followed the movement of his hand, never meeting mine. "These are the documents your stepfather asked me to prepare. They're very straightforward. Just sign here, and everything will be settled." I glanced down at the papers. At first, everything seemed normal legal jargon, formal language, the usual stuff you'd expect from a contract. But then I saw it. One of the clauses stated that I was transferring full ownership of the apartments to George. My blood ran cold. "This is wrong," I said, pushing the papers back toward him. "I didn't agree to this. I'm not signing anything." Rick didn't flinch. He just looked at me, his expression calm, almost bored. "I think you should reconsider, Miss Thompson. Your mother clearly made arrangements for this. I'm sure George would prefer to handle things quickly and efficiently. He's doing this for you, after all. He wants to help you move on from all of this." The calmness in his voice only made me angrier. This wasn't about helping me, it was about taking what wasn't his. "No, I won't sign," I said firmly. "You can tell George that. I'll deal with it myself." Rick's smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes changed. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something darker, something like a threat, and I felt my pulse quicken. It was enough to make me hesitate, just for a second. But I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. Not now. Not when I had no idea what they were really after. "I'm afraid you don't understand, Miss Thompson," Rick said, his voice low now, more insistent. "This isn't just about paperwork. This is about your future. Your mother's estate is complicated, and George has been more than generous in handling it all. If you don't sign, things could get messy. It could be a lot more difficult for you than you think." I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean, messy? What are you threatening me with?" Rick stood up, his eyes cold now, devoid of the charm he had been using moments before. "I'm not threatening you, Miss Thompson. I'm just stating the facts. Your mother's will, well, let's just say there were some things she didn't make public. Some things she didn't want you to know." I didn't have time to process what he was saying before he dropped another bombshell. "You're not the only one with a claim to those apartments. George, he's been very patient, but he won't wait forever. He's already started the process of contesting your mother's will, and if you don't cooperate, it'll be a lot harder for you to prove anything. He's been handling things for a lot longer than you know." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It felt like the ground beneath me shifted, like the walls of the room were closing in. I tried to steady my breath, but it felt impossible. Everything I thought I knew about my mother's wishes, about her will, everything I had believed, was unraveling in front of me. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. Rick leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You should have listened to George when he told you to sign. He was trying to help. But now, you'll see just how much harder it's going to get if you don't. I wouldn't want this to go public, Ms. Thompson. It's never a good look when families start airing their dirty laundry. But you can't just keep pushing this away. Eventually, you'll have to face the truth." My hands were shaking now, my mind reeling. What truth? What had my mother done? What was George planning? The questions spun around me like a hurricane, and I didn't have the answers to any of them. Rick straightened up, his smile returning, almost mockingly. "Think about it, Ms. Thompson. Think about your future. I'll give you some time to decide. But not too much." And with that, he walked out of the office, leaving me alone with the cold silence and the overwhelming weight of everything I didn't understand. I didn't know what to do. The more I thought about the situation, the more the walls seemed to close in. I couldn't trust Rick, I couldn't trust George, and now the uncertainty about my mother's will was eating at me from the inside. The more I tried to piece it together, the more tangled the whole thing became. If George had been managing the property for longer than I knew, why didn't he mention it? Why did he act like I had no idea what was going on? I had never once suspected there was anything strange about my mother's will or any of her dealings. She had always been so open with me, so careful with everything. It wasn't until I ran into an old friend of my mother's a few days later that things started to make sense. Emily had been one of my mother's closest friends, and she had always been there during the tough times. She was the one who helped take care of my mom in her final days, and I had always trusted her. She'd even been one of the few people to check in on me after my mom passed, just to make sure I was okay. So when I saw her at the coffee shop I'd been going to for the past few months, I didn't hesitate to sit down and talk to her. "Hey, Emily," I said, feeling a bit of relief seeing her familiar face. "How have you been?" She smiled softly, her eyes tired but kind. "I've been okay. Just keeping busy. How about you? How are you holding up?" I shrugged, trying to act like I was fine, but the tension in my shoulders and the worry in my chest gave me away. "I don't know. Honestly, things are a bit complicated right now." Her expression shifted. "Complicated? What's going on?" I hesitated. Should I tell her? Should I even trust her with this? But then I thought about it. If there was anyone who might know what my mother had been up to, it was Emily. She'd been there for everything. If anyone had the answers, it was her. So I told her everything, what George had said, the legal papers Rick had shown me, and how I felt like I was in over my head. Emily listened without interrupting, her brow furrowing as I spoke. She looked concerned, but there was something else in her eyes, a glimmer of recognition, like she knew something I didn't. Once I finished explaining, she leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. "I don't know exactly what's going on, but I have a feeling it's not what you think," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge of caution. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. She paused for a moment, clearly trying to find the right words. "Your mom, she wasn't always as transparent as you think she was. She had her secrets. Not big ones, but there were things she kept from you, especially in the last year or so." The way she said it made my heart stop. My mind raced. "What do you mean, secrets? What kind of secrets?" Emily looked around before speaking again, her voice lowering. "After your mom got married to George, things changed. Not in a way that would have made you suspect anything, but she started acting differently. She started spending a lot of time with him, talking about her assets, about the future. At first, I thought it was just them being, well, a couple. But then I noticed something strange. She started meeting with a lawyer. A lot. She never told you, did she?" I shook my head, my stomach sinking. "No, she didn't. I never knew about any of this." Emily's face grew serious, her eyes locked on mine. "She didn't want you to know. She was trying to protect you, but she wasn't sure how things would turn out. She trusted George, but she also knew that she might need to make some difficult decisions in the future. I think she was trying to shield you from it, but she didn't want you to be caught off guard." I didn't understand. "But what does that have to do with the apartments? What's going on with them? Why is George trying to take them now?" Emily hesitated again, as if weighing the consequences of telling me what she knew. After a long pause, she spoke. "I think your mother made a deal with George. Not about the apartments directly, but about her estate. The will. I don't think it was as straightforward as you think. There were some clauses in there, clauses that might not be entirely what they seemed. I don't have all the details, but I know your mother worked with a lawyer she trusted. A lawyer who had connections to George. I don't want to say too much, but I think you should start looking into that lawyer." I was stunned. My head was spinning, trying to make sense of everything she'd just told me. "So you're saying George and this lawyer, they were planning something? For years?" "I'm not sure about the timeline, but yes," Emily replied. "George might have known about the clauses in the will before you did. He might have been working on this for a while. But I also know your mother loved you, and she wouldn't have left you in the dark if she could avoid it. Something went wrong, though. You need to find that lawyer, figure out what your mom was doing in the final months of her life. Because I don't think you have all the information you need to make a decision yet." My mind was racing as I absorbed what she was saying. I thought I knew everything about my mom's life, her values, her wishes. But now it felt like I was stumbling through a maze, trying to make sense of things I wasn't even sure I understood. I had trusted George, but now it seemed like he had been playing a much bigger game, one that I was only beginning to realize. "Where can I find this lawyer?" I asked, my voice tight. Emily gave me a small, reluctant smile. "I'll give you the contact information. But be careful. There's more to this than you know. You need to prepare yourself. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. The more I learned, the more I realized that nothing was as simple as it seemed. If George and this lawyer were involved in something shady, I had to find out exactly what it was before it was too late. I had already started down this path, but now I was really starting to understand just how deep it went. Emily's advice was clear, but I wasn't sure how much time I had. Everything was about to change, and I had no idea how to stop it. But I was determined to find the answers, no matter what it took. I barely slept that night. The more I thought about the lawyer Emily mentioned, the more I realized I was running out of time. George was already making moves, Rick had been practically pressuring me into signing those papers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being manipulated from every angle. I didn't even know who to trust anymore. The entire situation had spun out of control in ways I hadn't seen coming. But I knew one thing for sure, I had to confront this head-on. If I didn't, everything my mother had worked for, everything she had trusted me with, could slip through my fingers. The following morning, I called the number Emily had given me for the lawyer. His name was Raymond Hodge. His voice on the other end of the line was calm, professional, almost disinterested. When I explained who I was and why I was calling, there was a long silence. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he finally asked. His tone wasn't threatening, but it was enough to make me second-guess everything. "You're digging into things your mother didn't want you to know." "I'm not asking for a history lesson," I snapped. "I'm asking for the truth. I need to know what was in my mother's will. What did she do? Why didn't she tell me?" Raymond sighed, and I could hear the rustling of papers on the other end of the line. "I can't go over all the details over the phone, but I can meet you. It's better that way. There are things you need to see, things that can't be explained in a few words. If you're still willing, meet me at my office tomorrow. I'll have everything ready for you." I hung up the phone, feeling like I was on the verge of something. I had no idea what was waiting for me, but the stakes had never been higher. I knew George was making moves, probably talking to more lawyers,